I stood in my parents' empty driveway staring at the oil stain where my car used to be. My brother Marcus had just casually mentioned over dinner that he sold that old piece of junk for $9,000 while I was away on my business trip. What he did not know was that hidden in a secret compartment I had built into the trunk were the original documents proving our grandmother's true will, documents that would expose the biggest family lie ever told. But before we dive into this wild family revenge story, I want to know, are you watching from your phone laptop? Or maybe sneaking a watch at work? Hit that like button if family drama gets your blood pumping and subscribe, because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me, you will want to see how karma comes full circle in the most unexpected way. Now let me tell you exactly how my own brother almost destroyed my life. To understand the magnitude of what Marcus had done, you need to know about the financial empire our family had built on a foundation of lies. Our grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, had been the matriarch of a successful real estate business spanning 3 generations. When she passed away 5 years ago, the reading of her will had shocked everyone except my father and Marcus. According to the official will that was read that day, Grandma Eleanor had left everything to the men in our family. My father inherited the main real estate company. Marcus got the investment portfolio worth over $2 million, and my younger brother Jake received the vacation properties. As for the women, my mother got some jewelry, my sister Rebecca received a small trust fund for her children, and I got absolutely nothing except grandmother's old car, a beaten-up 1992 Honda Accord that barely ran. Everyone had consoled me, saying grandmother must have thought I was doing well enough on my own since I had my marketing career. But something about that will reading had never sat right with me. Grandmother Eleanor had been a fierce advocate for women's rights her entire life. She had built her real estate empire in the 1960s when women could barely get business loans. She had always told me I reminded her of herself, that I had the same fire and determination she had possessed. The day after the will reading, I had driven that old Honda to grandmother's house one last time before the estate sale. While cleaning out her bedroom, I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden behind a loose floorboard under her bed was a metal box containing the real will, her true final wishes written in her own handwriting just 6 months before she died. In this handwritten document, grandmother had left the real estate company to me, recognizing my business degree and years of experience in marketing and property development. She had left specific instructions that the men in our family had proven themselves incapable of handling money responsibly, citing Marcus's gambling addiction and my father's history of failed business ventures. The jewelry and trust funds went to the women as expected, but the biggest shock was what she had written about my father and Marcus. Grandmother had discovered that they had been embezzling money from her accounts for years. She had documentation of forged checks, unauthorized withdrawals, and false investment claims they had been making. The real will included a detailed appendix listing every fraudulent transaction, every lie they had told, and every dollar they had stolen from her while she was developing dementia in her final years. But here was the most devastating part: she had known they would try to forge a will after her death. Grandmother Eleanor had anticipated their betrayal and had prepared accordingly. She had secretly recorded conversations with them, where they discussed their plans to handle the will situation and ensure the money stayed with the men in the family where it belonged. I had sat in that empty house holding these documents, my hands shaking as I realized the scope of their deception. Not only had they stolen from our dying grandmother, but they had also stolen my inheritance and manipulated the entire family into believing their version of events. For 5 years, I had watched Marcus blow through what I thought was his legitimate inheritance on luxury cars, expensive vacations, and gambling trips to Las Vegas. Meanwhile, I had been struggling to build my own business, taking out loans and working 70-hour weeks. The recordings were stored on an old cassette player that grandmother had hidden in the trunk of her car, the same car she had left to me in both versions of her will. She had known that if anyone would fight for the truth, it would be me. The car was not just an inheritance, it was a test and a treasure chest of evidence all rolled into one. I had carefully hidden all of these documents in a secret compartment I built into the trunk of that Honda. Over the past 5 years, I had been quietly building a legal case, consulting with attorneys, and gathering additional evidence of their continued financial manipulation of our family. I had discovered that they had not stopped with grandmother's money. They had been systematically manipulating our mother's finances, convincing her to give them power of attorney, and slowly draining her savings account. The plan had been to expose everything at this year's family reunion, where all the relatives would be gathered together. I had wanted to present the evidence publicly to make sure everyone knew the truth about what Marcus and my father had done. But now, with Marcus selling the car, years of careful planning, and irreplaceable evidence were potentially gone forever. As I stood in that driveway, I realized that this was not just about money anymore. This was about justice for our grandmother, protection for our mother, and holding two manipulative men accountable for years of lies and theft. Marcus thought he had made a quick $9,000, but he had actually just handed me the perfect opportunity to expose him in the most devastating way possible. The next morning, I did not confront Marcus directly. Instead, I did what any smart woman seeking justice would do. I started gathering intelligence. My first call was to Detective Sarah Martinez, a family friend who worked in white-collar crime. Over coffee, I explained the situation and showed her copies of the evidence I had made before hiding the originals in the car. Sarah's expression grew darker as she reviewed the documents. "Maya, this is not just family drama," she said, setting down the papers. "This is wire fraud, elder abuse, and embezzlement on a massive scale. We are talking about federal charges here. But first, we needed to recover the evidence from the car." Sarah helped me file a report claiming stolen property, which would allow us to trace the vehicle legally. Within hours, we discovered that Marcus had sold the car to a used car dealership across town called Jimmy's Auto Sales. The confrontation at Jimmy's was nothing short of spectacular. I arrived with Sarah, a locksmith, and a court order allowing me to retrieve my personal property from the vehicle. Jimmy, the lot owner, was cooperative once he realized the legal implications. He had purchased the car in good faith, but when we explained the situation, he was eager to help. Marcus had clearly not mentioned anything about personal belongings in the car. Jimmy confirmed that Marcus had specifically said the car was completely cleaned out and ready for resale. When we popped the trunk and I showed them the hidden compartment, even Jimmy whistled in amazement. "Lady, your brother sold you out for 9 grand, but he just handed you a gold mine," Jimmy said as we carefully extracted the metal box containing grandmother's true will, the recorded conversations, and years of financial documentation. But the real shock came when I played the recordings right there in Jimmy's office. Grandmother's voice was clear and strong as she confronted my father and Marcus about their theft. "I know about the forged checks, Marcus. I know about the fake investment statements you have been showing me. Did you really think I was too senile to notice $20,000 missing from my account?" The recording captured Marcus's response. "Mom, you are confused. That money went to legitimate investments. We are just trying to protect your assets." And then, grandmother's devastating reply. "I have been pretending to be more confused than I am watching you both steal from me. I have been documenting everything. When I die, Maya will inherit this business because she is the only one with enough integrity to run it." Sarah was already on her phone calling the district attorney's office. "We need to move fast," she told me. "With evidence this solid, we can get warrants and freeze their assets before they realize what is happening." The next phase of my plan was psychological warfare. I called a family meeting for that Sunday, telling everyone we needed to discuss some financial concerns about mother's care as she aged. I did not mention the car, the evidence, or what was coming. I wanted Marcus and my father to walk into this completely unprepared. Sunday dinner at my parents' house was surreal. Marcus was bragging about his latest investment success, showing off a new Rolex watch he had bought with the car money. My father was discussing his plans to expand the family business, talking about major purchases and new properties they were considering. I sat there listening to them discuss spending money they had stolen, watching my mother nod along, trustingly seeing my sister Rebecca struggle to keep up with their expensive lifestyle on her teacher's salary. The irony was perfect. They were celebrating their theft with the very evidence that would destroy them sitting in my purse. After dinner, I stood up and cleared my throat. Before everyone leaves, I have something important to share about grandmother's estate. The room fell silent. Marcus looked confused, probably wondering why I was bringing up ancient history. My father's expression was more guarded. He had always been the smarter of the two criminals. I recently discovered some inconsistencies in grandmother's final wishes. I began pulling out the metal box. It turns out she left us more than we realized. I played the first recording grandmother confronting them about the stolen money. The effect was immediate and devastating. Marcus went white as a sheet. My father started to stand up, probably to leave or try to stop me, but Sarah emerged from the kitchen where she had been waiting. Marcus Whitmore and David Whitmore, you are under arrest for elder abuse, embezzlement, and wire fraud, Sarah announced, pulling out her handcuffs. The chaos that followed was incredible. Marcus started screaming that this was all a misunderstanding, that I was setting them up out of jealousy. My father tried to claim that grandmother had been mentally incompetent when she made the recordings. My mother and Rebecca were crying, confused about what was happening. But the most satisfying moment came when I pulled out grandmother's real will and began reading it aloud. With each word, Marcus realized exactly what he had lost by selling that car. Not only had he handed me the evidence to destroy him, but he had also given up his chance to claim ignorance about the true inheritance. The real estate company goes to Maya. I read, watching the blood drain from his face. The investment portfolio is to be liquidated and donated to women's business organizations. And Marcus specifically receives nothing except this message: gambling addiction and greed have no place in our family legacy. As Sarah led them away in handcuffs, Marcus turned to me with pure hatred in his eyes. You planned this whole thing, did you not? You knew I would sell the car. I smiled sweetly at him. Actually, brother dear, I was going to expose you gently at the family reunion next month. But when you stole and sold my property without permission, you just moved up the timeline. You did this to yourself. The arrest of Marcus and my father sent shockwaves through our extended family and the local business community. Within days, I discovered I was not fighting this battle alone. The moment word spread about the embezzlement charges, other victims began emerging from the shadows, and unlikely allies stepped forward to help me rebuild what had been destroyed. The first ally came from an unexpected source. Rebecca, my sister, who had always been the peacemaker in our family, showed up at my apartment 3 days after the arrests with a box of documents and tears streaming down her face. Maya, I need to confess something, she said, setting the box on my kitchen table. I have known something was wrong for years, but I was too scared to speak up. Inside the box were bank statements, canceled checks, and financial documents that Rebecca had been secretly collecting for the past 2 years. She had noticed irregularities in the family business accounts when she helped with bookkeeping during tax season. Marcus had been skimming money from client escrow accounts, and my father had been inflating property values to secure larger loans than the properties were worth. I was terrified that if I said anything, they would cut me and the kids out of the family completely, Rebecca explained. As a single mom, I could not risk losing the financial support they provided for my children's education. But seeing them arrested, hearing those recordings, I realized I was enabling them by staying silent. Rebecca's evidence was crucial because it showed the ongoing nature of their crimes. While grandmother's documentation proved historical theft, Rebecca's records demonstrated that Marcus and my father had continued their fraudulent activities right up until their arrest. This pattern of ongoing criminal behavior would be essential for the prosecution's case. The second major ally came from the business world. Margaret Foster, a prominent attorney who specialized in estate fraud, contacted me after reading about the case in the local business journal. Margaret had a personal connection to our situation that made her particularly motivated to help. 15 years ago, Marcus and your father defrauded my elderly aunt out of her property, Margaret revealed during our first meeting. They convinced her to sell her house below market value, claiming they were helping her avoid foreclosure. Then they flipped the property for 3 times what they paid her. I have been waiting for someone with enough evidence to take them down. Margaret brought something invaluable to our alliance. She had been quietly investigating my father and Marcus for years, building a file of their questionable real estate transactions. She had discovered at least 12 elderly clients who had been manipulated into unfavorable deals, often involving properties that Marcus and my father later sold for substantial profits. Your grandmother's case is just the tip of the iceberg, Margaret explained, showing me a thick file of similar cases. We can use this evidence to demonstrate a clear pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly victims. This transforms your family situation into a major criminal enterprise investigation. The third ally was perhaps the most surprising. Jimmy Martinez, the used car dealer, who had unknowingly purchased the Honda from Marcus, became an unexpected champion for our cause. Jimmy felt terrible about his role in the situation, even though he had acted in good faith. More importantly, Jimmy had connections in the local Latino business community that would prove invaluable. Your brother treated me like garbage when he sold me that car, Jimmy told me. He made jokes about selling junk to the Mexican guy who would not know any better. I may not have a law degree, but I know right from wrong, and I want to help you nail these guys. Jimmy's contribution went beyond moral support. His auto shop had been one of many small businesses that Marcus had targeted for predatory loans through a side business he ran. Jimmy had detailed records of Marcus's loan sharking operation, including evidence that Marcus had been charging illegal interest rates and using intimidation tactics against borrowers who fell behind on payments. But the alliance that surprised me most came from within the legal system itself. District Attorney Patricia Williams assigned one of her most experienced prosecutors, Amanda Torres, to handle the case. Amanda had a reputation for being ruthless in white-collar crime prosecutions, and she was particularly motivated by cases involving elder abuse. Maya, I want you to know that this case has become a priority for our office, Amanda told me during our strategy meeting. The evidence you have provided has opened up multiple federal investigations. The FBI is now looking into your father and Marcus's activities across state lines. Amanda explained that grandmother's recordings had provided probable cause for investigators to examine years of financial records. They had discovered that Marcus and my father had been running sophisticated fraud operations targeting elderly property owners across 3 states. The scheme involved convincing elderly homeowners to sell their properties to avoid supposed legal troubles, then purchasing the properties through shell companies for far below market value. We are not just talking about family drama anymore, Amanda emphasized. This is organized fraud on a scale that could result in decades of prison time for both men. The prosecution team began building a comprehensive case that went far beyond our family situation. They brought in forensic accountants who discovered over $2 million in fraudulent transactions. They found evidence of money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy charges that could be filed against both Marcus and my father. As our alliance grew stronger, so did our strategy for ensuring justice. Margaret Foster filed civil suits to recover stolen property on behalf of elderly victims, while Amanda Torres built the criminal case that would put Marcus and my father in prison. Rebecca provided inside knowledge of their business operations, and Jimmy Martinez connected us with other small business owners who had been victimized. But perhaps the most powerful alliance was the one forming among the families who had been affected by Marcus and my father's crimes. Margaret organized a support group for the elderly victims and their families. These meetings became both therapy sessions and strategy planning gatherings. Listening to other families' stories reinforced how extensive the damage had been. Mrs. Rodriguez had lost her family home of 40 years due to Marcus's predatory loan practices. The Thompson family had been manipulated into selling their deceased father's property for a fraction of its value. The Williams family had discovered that my father had been stealing from their elderly mother's trust fund while serving as her financial advisor. These families did not just want their money back, They wanted public accountability and assurance that Marcus and my father would never be able to victimize anyone else. Their collective testimony would be crucial in demonstrating the widespread impact of the crimes and ensuring that any plea bargaining would include substantial prison time. As winter turned to spring, our alliance had grown into a formidable force for justice. We had legal experts, financial investigators, victim advocates, and community support all working toward the same goal. What had started as a family betrayal over a car sale had evolved into a comprehensive takedown of a criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. The most satisfying part was knowing that Marcus's impulsive decision to sell my car had been the catalyst for everything. If he had just asked permission, if he had shown even basic respect for my property rights, none of this would have happened. His greed and arrogance had finally caught up with him, and now he was facing consequences that would reshape the rest of his life. But our alliance was about to face its biggest test yet, because we were about to discover that not everyone we trusted was truly on our side. Just when everything seemed to be falling into place, our carefully constructed alliance began to crumble from within. The betrayal came from the person I had trusted most, Rebecca, my own sister, who I thought had finally found the courage to stand up for what was right. It started with small things that I initially dismissed as stress-related mistakes. Rebecca began missing important meetings with the prosecution team, claiming family emergencies or sick children. When she did attend, she seemed distracted and evasive, no longer the determined ally who had brought me that crucial box of evidence months earlier. The first real warning sign came during a strategy session at Margaret Foster's law office. We were reviewing Rebecca's financial documents when Amanda Torres noticed something troubling in the bank statements Rebecca had provided. "Maya, some of these dates do not align with what Rebecca told us initially," Amanda said, pointing to several transactions highlighted in yellow. According to these records, Rebecca received 3 large deposits from Marcus's investment account over the past year. The timing suggests these payments occurred after she claims to have discovered the fraud. My stomach dropped as I stared at the evidence. The deposits were substantial, $5,000, $8,000, and $12,000 respectively. Rebecca had told us she had been financially struggling as a single mother, which was why she had been afraid to speak up about Marcus and my father's criminal activities. But these records suggested a very different story. Margaret Foster immediately began cross-referencing the deposits with Marcus's business records that we had subpoenaed. What she discovered was devastating. The payments to Rebecca corresponded exactly with dates when she had access to sensitive information about our legal strategy. Each deposit came within days of Rebecca attending our planning meetings or receiving updates about the prosecution's case. "Rebecca has been reporting back to Marcus," Margaret concluded grimly. "Every strategy we discussed, every piece of evidence we shared with her, every witness we planned to call, she has been feeding it all directly to the defense team." The scope of Rebecca's betrayal became clear as we examined the timeline more carefully. While Marcus and my father sat in jail awaiting trial, Rebecca had been serving as their intelligence source, helping their lawyers anticipate our moves and prepare counter-strategies. The information she provided had allowed the defense team to discredit several key witnesses and challenge crucial pieces of evidence. But the most heartbreaking discovery was personal. Rebecca had been playing both sides from the very beginning, maintaining her role as my trusted ally while secretly working to protect Marcus and my father. The tears, the confessions, the apparent guilt over staying silent for years. It had all been an elaborate performance designed to gain my trust and infiltrate our legal strategy. The confrontation with Rebecca took place at my apartment on a rainy Thursday evening. Amanda Torres and Margaret Foster flanked me as I presented Rebecca with the evidence of her financial betrayal. I had hoped against hope that there would be some innocent explanation, some misunderstanding that would preserve our sisterly bond. Instead, Rebecca's mask finally dropped completely. "You self-righteous witch," she snarled, abandoning any pretense of remorse or family loyalty. "Do you have any idea what you have done to this family? Marcus and Dad built that business from nothing, and you are destroying it over some ancient grudge." Her words hit like physical blows. "Ancient grudge, Rebecca. They stole from our dying grandmother. They have been defrauding elderly people for years. And what about my children? Rebecca shot back. What about their college funds, their future security? You are so obsessed with playing the victim that you cannot see how your crusade for justice is going to destroy innocent people. It became clear that Rebecca's betrayal was not just about money, it was about a fundamentally different worldview. She genuinely believed that family loyalty should override legal and moral considerations. In her mind, protecting Marcus and my father was more important than seeking justice for their victims, even if those victims included our own grandmother. The $5,000 a month Marcus was paying me was not bribery, Rebecca continued. It was child support for my kids' security for their future. You think your precious justice is worth making my children suffer? Margaret Foster stepped forward with legal documents in her hand. Rebecca, what you describe is still conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Your motivation does not change the criminal nature of your actions. The legal implications of Rebecca's betrayal were severe for our case. The defense team now had months of insider information about our strategy. They knew which witnesses we planned to call, which evidence we considered strongest, and which legal arguments we intended to pursue. Effectively, they had been receiving our playbook in real time throughout the entire pre-trial preparation. Amanda Torres was furious but determined. We need to completely restructure our approach, she told me after Rebecca stormed out. Assume that everything we shared with Rebecca has been compromised. We start over with a new strategy, new evidence presentation, and complete information security going forward. The betrayal created a crisis that went beyond legal strategy. Other members of our alliance began questioning whether there were additional traitors in our ranks. The elderly victims and their families who had trusted us with their stories wondered if their personal information had also been compromised. The unity and determination that had carried us through months of preparation began to fracture. Jimmy Martinez was particularly affected by Rebecca's betrayal. Maya, if your own sister could sell you out, how do we know who else might flip? He asked during an emergency meeting at his auto shop. These guys have money and connections. What if they get to other people in our group? The psychological impact was equally devastating. I had lost not just a sister, but my faith in family bonds that I had thought were unbreakable. Rebecca's betrayal forced me to confront the possibility that loyalty and justice might be fundamentally incompatible, that some people would always choose personal benefit over moral responsibility. Margaret Foster tried to provide perspective during one of our darkest strategy sessions. Maya, betrayal like this is common in complex fraud cases. When substantial money is involved, even family members can be turned. What matters now is how we respond and rebuild. But rebuilding seemed impossible when the defense team held so many advantages. They had used Rebecca's intelligence to file motions challenging the admissibility of grandmother's recordings, claiming they were obtained illegally. They had prepared character witnesses to testify that Marcus and my father were respected business leaders who had been entrapped by a vindictive family member. Most devastatingly, they were prepared to argue that I had manipulated the evidence and coerced Rebecca into providing false testimony. Using information Rebecca had gathered about our case preparation, they planned to paint me as an unstable woman seeking revenge for being excluded from grandmother's original will. As we approached the trial date, our alliance seemed to be falling apart just when we needed it most. We had lost our inside source, our legal strategy was compromised, and our family unity was completely shattered. Marcus and my father, despite being in jail, seemed to be winning the psychological warfare that had always been their specialty. But sometimes, when everything seems hopeless, salvation comes from the most unexpected source. And in our case, that salvation was about to arrive in the form of someone who had been watching our family's destruction, from the shadows waiting for the perfect moment to emerge with evidence that would change everything. Just when our case seemed destined for failure due to Rebecca's betrayal, salvation arrived in the most unexpected form. An elderly woman named Dorothy Patterson, who had been watching our family drama unfold from her retirement home across town. Dorothy had been grandmother Eleanor's best friend for over 50 years, and she had been waiting for the right moment to reveal secrets that would turn our entire case around. Dorothy contacted Margaret Foster directly, having read about our legal troubles in the local newspaper. When Margaret brought her to meet with our legal team, Dorothy appeared fragile and soft-spoken, the kind of elderly woman that most people would dismiss as harmless. But the documents she carried in her worn leather briefcase would prove to be the most damning evidence against Marcus and my father that we had seen yet. Eleanor knew her sons were stealing from her long before she developed any memory problems. Dorothy explained, her voice gaining strength as she began to tell her story. She was sharp as a tack until the day she died, and she was furious about what David and Marcus were doing to her. What Dorothy revealed next was absolutely devastating. Grandmother Eleanor had not just recorded conversations with Marcus and my father, she had been systematically documenting their criminal activities with Dorothy's help for over 2 years before her death. The two elderly women had conducted their own investigation, photographing documents, recording phone calls, and even following Marcus and my father to meetings with their victims. Eleanor was a businesswoman first and foremost, Dorothy continued. She knew that emotions would not hold up in court, but evidence would. So we collected evidence. Dorothy opened her briefcase and began pulling out file after file of meticulously organized documentation. There were photographs of forged signatures on bank documents, recordings of Marcus bragging about manipulating elderly clients, and detailed logs of every fraudulent transaction they had discovered. Most importantly, there were signed affidavits from other elderly victims who had agreed to testify but had been too frightened to come forward until now. Eleanor made me promise to wait until someone in the family had the courage to fight back, Dorothy explained, looking directly at me. She said if her granddaughter Maya ever started asking questions, I should give her everything we had collected. She knew you were the only one who could not be bought or intimidated. The evidence Dorothy provided was a prosecutor's dream. Unlike the recordings from the car which the defense had been trying to challenge as illegally obtained, Dorothy's evidence had been collected with full knowledge and consent from grandmother Eleanor. Every document was properly dated, witnessed, and authenticated. Every recording was clear and legally admissible. But the most shocking revelation came when Dorothy played a recording of Marcus and my father discussing their plans to forge grandmother's will. The conversation had been recorded just 3 weeks before grandmother's death, and it captured them in explicit detail, planning how they would manipulate the probate process. We just need to make sure Maya does not ask too many questions. Marcus's voice was crystal clear on the recording. If she starts poking around, we might have to cut her out completely and claim Mom was incompetent when she wrote whatever she left behind. My father's response was equally damning. The old lady is sharper than she lets on. I think she suspects what we have been doing. We need to move fast after she dies and get control of everything before anyone else can interfere. Amanda Torres was practically vibrating with excitement as she listened to the recordings. This is conspiracy to commit fraud captured in real time, she said. Combined with the evidence we already have, this gives us an airtight case for premeditated criminal enterprise. Dorothy was not finished with her revelations. She pulled out a thick folder containing financial records that grandmother and she had secretly copied from Marcus's office during a family barbecue the previous summer. Eleanor distracted them while I photographed everything I could find, Dorothy said with a mischievous smile. We may have been old ladies, but we were not stupid ones. The financial records showed the full scope of Marcus and my father's criminal activities. They had been running a sophisticated mortgage fraud scheme, convincing elderly homeowners to take out reverse mortgages and then stealing the proceeds through fake investment opportunities. They had defrauded at least 30 families over the past 5 years, stealing over $4 million in total. But Dorothy saved the best evidence for last. She pulled out a video camera that looked like a relic from the 1990s. Eleanor recorded her final message for you specifically, Dorothy said, handing me the camera. She made me promise to show this to you only if you proved yourself worthy by fighting for justice. When I played the video, grandmother Eleanor appeared on the small screen, sitting in her favorite chair in her living room. Despite being in her final months of life, her voice was strong and her eyes were fierce with determination. Maya, my dear granddaughter, If you are watching this, it means you have chosen to fight for what is right instead of what is easy. I am so proud of you for having the courage that your father and brothers lack. Grandmother went on to explain everything she and Dorothy had discovered about Marcus and my father's criminal activities. But more importantly, she provided detailed instructions for accessing additional evidence she had hidden in safety deposit boxes around the city. I have been preparing for this battle for years, Grandmother continued in the video. I knew that David and Marcus would try to steal everything after I died, so I made sure they would ultimately destroy themselves through their own greed and stupidity. The safety deposit boxes contained backup copies of every piece of evidence, additional financial records, and signed statements from victims who had been too afraid to come forward while Grandmother was alive. Most importantly, they contained documentation proving that Rebecca had been receiving payments from Marcus for over 3 years, not just the past year, as we had discovered. Rebecca was never truly on your side, Grandmother's recorded voice explained. I knew she was taking money from Marcus, and I documented that too. When the time comes, you will need to expose her betrayal to protect the other victims. Dorothy's emergence as our secret ally completely transformed the legal landscape. The defense team's strategy had been built around the assumption that they knew all of our evidence through Rebecca's intelligence reports. Now, we had an entirely new set of documentation that they had never seen and could never have prepared for. Margaret Foster immediately filed motions to include Dorothy's evidence in our case. The recordings, photographs, and financial documents were so comprehensive that they filled in every gap that the defense had been hoping to exploit. More importantly, Dorothy's testimony would provide first-hand witness accounts of Grandmother's mental state and her deliberate efforts to document the fraud. Amanda Torres began preparing subpoenas for the additional safety deposit boxes that Grandmother had mentioned in her video. Each box they opened revealed more evidence of Marcus and my father's criminal enterprise. Bank records showed systematic theft from dozens of elderly clients. Forged documents demonstrated a pattern of fraud spanning over a decade. Audio recordings captured Marcus and my father planning additional crimes even after Grandmother's death. The psychological impact of Dorothy's revelations was equally important for our alliance. Jimmy Martinez, who had been questioning whether we could trust anyone after Rebecca's betrayal, was reinvigorated by the scope of the evidence. The elderly victims who had been worried about the strength of our case now felt confident that justice would finally be served. This changes everything, Margaret told me after we had reviewed all of Dorothy's evidence. The defense team built their entire strategy around attacking the credibility of your evidence and claiming family vendetta. But Dorothy's documentation proves this was never about family drama. This was about stopping career criminals who happened to be your relatives. Most importantly, Dorothy's evidence provided the missing piece that would ensure Marcus and my father could never manipulate their way out of consequences again. The systematic nature of their crimes, the premeditated planning captured on recording, and the extensive documentation of their victims created a legal case that was absolutely bulletproof. As we prepared for trial with our new evidence, I felt a mix of grief and satisfaction. Grief for the family relationships that had been permanently destroyed by lies and betrayal, but satisfaction knowing that Grandmother Eleanor had been fighting alongside us from beyond the grave. Her final gift had been the tools we needed to ensure that justice would finally be served. The trial that followed Dorothy's revelations was nothing short of a complete vindication of everything we had fought for. Marcus and my father's defense team, who had been so confident with Rebecca's inside information, found themselves completely blindsided by evidence they had never seen and could never have anticipated. Amanda Torres opened the prosecution with Grandmother Eleanor's final video message, playing it for the entire courtroom to see. The impact was immediate and devastating. Here was a dying woman, clearly mentally sharp and determined, exposing her own sons as criminals who had been stealing from her for years. The jury watched in stunned silence as Grandmother methodically laid out the evidence against Marcus and my father in her own words. The defense team's strategy crumbled within the first week of testimony. They had planned to portray grandmother as mentally incompetent and me as a vindictive family member seeking revenge. Instead, they faced an elderly woman whose final months had been spent carefully documenting criminal evidence with the help of her equally sharp best friend. Dorothy Patterson proved to be an exceptional witness. Despite her age, she was articulate, detailed, and utterly credible as she described how she and grandmother had conducted their investigation. When the defense attorney tried to suggest that two elderly women could not have accurately documented complex financial crimes, Dorothy's response silenced the courtroom. Young man Eleanor and I built successful businesses when women were not even allowed to have credit cards in their own names. We did not suddenly become stupid when we turned 80. We became more determined to protect other people from being victimized by men like her sons. The financial evidence was overwhelming. Forensic accountants testified about the systematic theft from grandmother's accounts, the mortgage fraud scheme targeting elderly victims, and the money laundering operations Marcus and my father had been running. Every transaction was documented, every forged signature was identified, and every victim was given a voice through detailed testimony about how they had been manipulated and robbed. But the most devastating moment came when Rebecca was called as a witness. Amanda Torres had decided to expose Rebecca's betrayal publicly, both to discredit any testimony she might give in defense of Marcus and my father, and to demonstrate the full scope of the criminal conspiracy. Under oath, Rebecca was forced to admit that she had been receiving payments from Marcus throughout the investigation. She was compelled to acknowledge that she had been feeding information to the defense team while pretending to support our pursuit of justice. Most painfully, she had to admit that she had chosen money over truth, family loyalty over legal responsibility. "I was trying to protect my children's future," Rebecca said from the witness stand, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus promised me that if I helped him, he would make sure my kids could go to college." Amanda Torres's cross-examination was brutal, but necessary. "And how exactly were your children's futures protected by allowing Marcus and your father to continue defrauding elderly victims? Did you consider that other families have children whose futures were destroyed by their crimes?" Rebecca had no answer. Her testimony effectively demonstrated that the criminal conspiracy had extended beyond just Marcus and my father to include family members who were willing to enable their crimes for personal benefit. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts, the courtroom erupted in celebration from the elderly victims and their families who had come to witness justice finally being served. Marcus received 15 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. My father was sentenced to 20 years due to his role as the mastermind of the operation and his longer history of criminal activities. Rebecca received 3 years probation and community service for conspiracy and obstruction of justice, but the real consequences for her were the permanent destruction of her relationship with our extended family. But the criminal convictions were only the beginning of justice being served. Margaret Foster's civil suits resulted in the recovery of over $3 million in stolen assets money that was distributed to the elderly victims and their families. The real estate company that my father had built on fraudulent foundations was liquidated with the proceeds going toward restitution for victims. The most satisfying moment came when I finally inherited what grandmother Eleanor had always intended me to have. With Marcus and my father's criminal convictions finalized, the probate court invalidated their forged will and recognized grandmother's true final wishes. I became the owner of the legitimate family real estate business, which I immediately restructured to focus on helping elderly clients protect their property rights rather than exploiting them. Jimmy Martinez became my first business partner in the new venture. His experience with predatory lending and his connections in the Latino community helped us develop programs to educate vulnerable populations about financial fraud. His auto shop became one of our satellite offices, providing accessible services to working-class families who needed legal protection. Dorothy Patterson became like a second grandmother to me, joining the board of the nonprofit foundation I established in Eleanor's memory. The foundation provides free legal services to elderly victims of financial fraud and education programs to help families recognize the warning signs of elder abuse. Margaret Foster and I developed a close friendship that extended far beyond our professional relationship. She helped me navigate the emotional challenges of rebuilding my life after losing most of my biological family, while gaining a chosen family of people who shared my values and commitment to justice. The most unexpected relationship that emerged was with Amanda Torres, the prosecutor who had fought so hard for justice in our case. Amanda became a mentor and friend, helping me understand how the legal system could be used to protect vulnerable people, rather than just punish criminals after the fact. 6 months after the trial ended, I organized a celebration dinner for everyone who had supported our pursuit of justice. We gathered at Jimmy's restaurant. He had used his share of the recovered assets to expand his business into a family dining establishment that served his community. As I looked around the table at Dorothy, Margaret, Amanda, Jimmy, and the elderly victims who had become part of my chosen family, I felt a peace that I had never experienced during my years of biological family drama. These people had stood with me when everything was at stake, had fought for truth when lies would have been easier, and had chosen justice even when it required personal sacrifice. The evening's most emotional moment came when Dorothy played one final recording that Grandmother Eleanor had made. This one intended to be shared only after justice had been served. Maya, if you are hearing this, it means you have proven yourself worthy of the family name in ways that your father and brothers never could. You have chosen integrity over easy money, justice over false loyalty, and truth over convenient lies. I am prouder of you than you will ever know. Grandmother's voice continued with a message that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Remember that family is not just about blood. It is about the people who stand with you when everything is falling apart, who fight for you when you cannot fight for yourself, and who choose to do what is right, even when it costs them something precious. You have found your true family now, and I know they will love and protect you the way that David, Marcus, and Rebecca never could. As the evening wound down and we shared stories about the journey that had brought us together, I realized that Marcus's decision to sell my car had been the catalyst for the most important transformation of my life. His greed had inadvertently led me to discover not just hidden evidence, but hidden strength within myself and genuine connections with people who valued justice over profit. The final irony was perfect. Marcus had sold my inheritance for $9,000, thinking he was getting away with easy money. Instead, he had handed me the tools to recover millions of dollars for fraud victims, expose decades of criminal activity, and build a life surrounded by people who genuinely cared about making the world better rather than just making themselves richer. Today, 2 years after that night, when I discovered my car missing from the driveway, I run a successful business helping protect elderly people from financial fraud. I live in Grandmother Eleanor's restored house, surrounded by photos of my chosen family and mementos from the justice-seeking journey that brought us together. Marcus and my father write letters from prison occasionally, usually asking for money or claiming they have been wrongfully convicted. I do not respond to their requests, but I do keep their letters as reminders of the price of choosing greed over integrity. Rebecca has made several attempts to reconcile, especially now that she realizes the financial security she thought she was protecting by betraying us never really existed. But trust once broken by conscious betrayal cannot be easily repaired. I wish her well, but I have learned that forgiveness does not require maintaining relationships with people who proved they will choose money over family when the stakes get high. If you have made it this far in my story, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was living a lie? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what is right? How do you handle situations where the people who should protect you are actually the ones putting you in danger? Drop a comment below and share your own family karma stories. I read every single one, and I know how much courage it takes to speak up about family betrayal. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life justice stories. And if you know someone who needs to hear about standing up to family manipulation, please share this video with them. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey from family betrayal to chosen family triumph. Remember that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the catalyst for the best thing that ever happens to you. Justice may take time, but it is always worth fighting for, especially when you find the right people to fight alongside you. Until next time, keep standing up for what is right, even when it is not easy. You never know who is waiting in the shadows with the evidence you need to change everything.